All right, handing it over to Kim Anderson.
We'll try that one more time. With the mute off, after 2 years, we still can't seem to get it quite right. So thank you all for joining today. My name is Kim Anderson. I'm the Deputy Director of Planning here at the San Joaquin Council of Governments. And on behalf of our team here at SJCOG and the project team, Enterprise Community Partners, and UC Davis Center for Regional Change, welcome to day 2 of our Housing Symposium. Yesterday's conversation led the groundwork, highlighting the extent of the growing need for increased housing choice and supportive programs to keep local San Joaquin County residents housed. Christine and her team also highlighted the displacement mapping tool. It's a resource that local and regional agencies, as well as nonprofits, can use to identify fault lines in the county for housing insecurity and displacement risk. Today's focus is shifting just a little bit. We'll talk about SJCOG's technical role in housing need within the county, and then some potential tools and other ways we can begin to help our jurisdictions and to increase housing production county. And just welcome, and I'll turn it back over to the consultant team.
Thank you, Kim. Let me go ahead and switch slides. All right. Good morning, everyone. Almost afternoon. If you are joining us again, welcome back. And if it's your first time tuning in, welcome and thanks for joining us during your lunch hour. I will go ahead and get started. My name is Brenda Amboy. I'm from Stockton, and I am also a program fellow with Enterprise Community Partners. Prior to joining Enterprise last June, I was completing my Master of City Planning at UC Berkeley. I currently work alongside Christine Williams here in the Central Valley doing programmatic and policy work. My role on the project team was to manage all of the interviews with public agencies and community-based organizations to create website content for the study, and lastly, to develop a policy toolkit, which I will be discussing today. And also, Christine Corrales, let me know if I am going too fast and I can slow down as well. Okay, here is a quick overview of my presentation. First, I will be going over what the housing toolkit is. Next, I'll go over how to use the toolkit. And lastly, I will briefly discuss what the link is to affirmatively furthering fair housing. So what is the housing policy? So what is the Housing Policy Toolkit and how was it formed? Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, and certainly during, many San Joaquin County residents were experiencing increases in their housing costs without a correlated increase in wages or overall income. While many of the long-term impacts of the pandemic are still uncertain, it has definitely exacerbated the housing crisis, leaving many residents at risk of displacement and even homelessness, which is why this toolkit is very important. So how did this policy toolkit come about? Following our outreach with public agencies and community-based organizations, our team wanted to create a tool that could be utilized by local jurisdictions that could build off of the findings in the report and offer examples of potential solutions that could help address displacement and increase neighborhood stability. Additionally, we also envision this as a tool for folks to refer to when addressing their RHNA allocation. Next slide, let's see.
Hey, Brenda.
As part of my research.
Brenda, could you slow down just a tad?
Yes, of course. As part of my research, I utilized literature from lead anti-displacement studies to identify policies that aim to address displacement. The policies in this toolkit were identified in the following papers listed on this slide, as well as various public agency and advocacy resources. The matrix in our toolkit builds on the table located on the slide, which is from the California Air Resources Board white paper. And while the CARB paper focuses more on evaluating the effectiveness of each strategy, Our toolkit is really intended to be a resource for cities and county staff, as well as elected officials, to learn more about ways to address displacement in our community and to provide examples of how they have been implemented in California and across the US. Next up, I will walk us through a few examples and show folks how they can access the toolkit on the SJCOG website. This menu is intended for SJCOG member jurisdictions to identify new strategies that can address displacement concerns and strengthen or improve existing policies to support housing security. The matrix, which I will show on the next slide, is broken down into the following categories. First is the 3 Ps of housing. This will help determine which of the 3 categories of housing the policy addresses. The first is protection, which focuses on protecting the most vulnerable residents from evictions and displacement. And the second is preservation policies, which aim to provide strategies, resources to tenants, landlords, and other stakeholders, such as nonprofit housing developers, to help preserve existing affordable housing. Last in this category are production policies, which focus on increasing housing, more specifically affordable housing, and reducing barriers to development. The next category is time frame for effectiveness, and it should be noted that time frame in this toolkit is not referring to how long it will take to implement, but rather how long would it take to have an impact on residents. So short-term policies could have an immediate impact on residents once in place and focus on tenant protections. Medium-term policies will not have the same immediate impact as a short-term strategy, but instead set up guidance or structure for more permanent solutions that address displacement or help support the sustainability of short-term policies. Long-term policies can help ensure that programs or policies in place will keep current and future residents from being displaced or disproportionately impacted by changes in the region, and should be viewed as changes to existing systems and essentially build on the previous 2 categories. Additionally, these solutions should also take into account historical injustices, as well as work to dismantle prior systemic inequities in collaboration with the community. The next category is scale. So up first is neighborhood, which can be implemented on a smaller scale and focuses on a proposed project or development that may have a significant impact on a specific neighborhood. Additionally, policies implemented on this scale can incorporate targeted community feedback or be used to build communities' assets. Policies in this category could also be managed by a nonprofit or in collaboration with local public agencies. Then we have citywide, which focuses on making changes to existing programs or policies that could help move cities' housing priorities forward. And last in this category is countywide, which would allow for a broader approach to housing challenges, protections, and would also include unincorporated areas. The final category we have is policy type, and this really aims to categorize policies by how they could be implemented or managed. Depending on each city's process for implementing programs or ordinances, each policy could still need approval from a legislative body or city manager or an administrator. I have attempted to categorize each policy in the following categories, but will ultimately defer to city, county staff, as well as elected officials who are more familiar with their jurisdiction's processes. So for policies, these are strategies that would need to be passed through a legislative body or added to codes such as a right to counsel. The next is planning. Policies in this category could be incorporated in planning documents such as a housing element, general plan, or zoning map. And the third is a program which could require new or specific staff and a host department. So this could be something like an eviction diversion program, which is one of the examples I'll go over shortly. And last is funding. Oh no, sorry if my screen just went black. Last is funding policies in this category, they can serve as a funding source to further protect tenants or preserve and produce affordable housing, such as a housing trust fund. Okay, so when viewing the matrix and all of the policies listed, it's important to note that policies and their associated impacts do not land equally. There are several factors that contribute to effectiveness of any one strategy, and considerations such as local and regional market strength, available tax base, political inclinations, and capacity to implement are all important variables that may dictate the success or failure of a policy or programmatic intervention. In this matrix, you can see where specific policies land. For example, a rental registry is a protection policy, and it could be implemented on the city scale and added to municipal code. Okay, so I'm going to walk everyone through how to access the toolkit on the SJCOG website. So bear with me while I switch screens to share that page. Okay, so if you are starting at the home page, you are going to select, in a second when I can scroll up, you're gonna go to programs in this top menu bar, and then you're going to find the regional planning section and select regional planning studies. Once you're on this page, you're going to scroll all the way down to community diversity and displacement studies and click that page. So this is the entire studies page, and this is where you will find the full report that is forthcoming, the map that Bernadette and Christine mentioned yesterday, as well as the methodology that is used in the map. So at the bottom is where you will find the housing policy toolkit, as well as in the left-hand menu bar. So I will click on protection for this example. And Stephanie at SJCOG has made it extremely accessible for everyone, and you don't have to even leave the page to make sure, to access all of these things. So I will choose rental registry. So if you are interested in learning more about a rental registry, you are able to read a condensed summary of that policy and access the jurisdiction or municipal code's website here, as well as read a short case study. So for this example, Fresno, California was the example. So you're able to read a little bit more, as well as possibly reach out to the jurisdiction that has implemented this policy. Okay, let me switch back over quickly, sorry. Okay, all right. So the first example up is a eviction diversion program. So if we are looking at what categories the policy falls under in the matrix, the first would be that it is a protection policy, and it is intended to provide tenants and landlords with necessary resources and information to help resolve housing issues, really with the hopes of keeping tenants from being evicted and avoiding prolonged litigation. If it were implemented, the timeframe for having an impact on both tenants and landlords would be short, and once in place, each party could have access to resources and begin applying for services through the program. While I have noted in the matrix that it could be implemented at the city or county scale, the county level would probably create a stronger system, since it would allow for local coordination with the courts. And as for implementation, an eviction diversion program would likely require dedicated staff to process paperwork, as well as attorneys or mediators to provide tenants and landlords with assistance or information. And additional questions to consider while looking at the toolkit is, what tenants would be eligible for a program like this? Who would lead or manage? And where will funding to cover things like administrative costs, staff costs, program delivery, et cetera, come from? And what would success ultimately look like for this program? So those are just some things to kind of keep in mind as you're looking through the toolkit, and how they relate to your city or the county. The next example I have is proactive code enforcement. So I know this was something that came up yesterday during our discussion. It is a preservation policy that could have short-term impact on residents and be implemented on the city or county level. Since most cities and counties already have a code enforcement department, this could be looked at as a way for it to be improved. So the city of Fresno requires that all property owners have to register their properties in a public database, and they subject all units to a baseline inspection as well as regular follow-up. And similar to the city of Stockton's Ask Stockton app, residents can submit anonymously on a range of concerns as well as access information about the city through the Fresno Go app. Additionally, the city of Fresno has also created what's called the Quality Neighborhoods Guide for residents and property owners that highlight the 15 most common violations to sort of encourage voluntary compliance so that people are kind of aware of what are typically the highest complaints. And lastly on this topic, the city of San Jose actually identified exploring more ways to assist landlords with low-cost loans for property improvements, expanding proactive rental inspections to those not covered in their traditional rental inspection program. So they are looking to expand to single-family homes, duplexes, condos, and other types of rentals, and really targeting preservation funding to help community and nonprofit partners acquire and maintain properties, as well as reviewing their city's relocation policies. The last example is a housing trust fund, which could serve as a distinct entity to receive ongoing revenue from dedicated sources of public funding. The key benefit really to a housing trust fund is that it provides a secure, reliable, and low-cost source of funds to address local housing needs. While housing trust funds are viewed as something that is something that's very technical and requiring a lot of coordinating and organizing, it is really included, again, like many of the policies in the toolkit, to allow community members, cities, or county staff to explore further, and try to see really what these policies would look like for them in their jurisdiction. And when looking at the policy matrix, it would fall under the production category, and timeframe for impact would be long-term. As for scale, that can be left up to cities and or the county to decide which would best serve residents, as well as seeing if it's actually feasible. And lastly, it would fall under the funding or fee category. The last section of my presentation will briefly discuss the link to affirmatively furthering fair housing requirements. In 2018, AB 686 was passed to expand upon the fair housing requirements and protections outlined in the Fair Employment and Housing Act. And the law requires that all state and local public agencies to facilitate deliberate action to explicitly address, combat, and relieve disparities resulting from past patterns of segregation in order to foster more inclusive communities. In addition, it also created new requirements that apply to all housing elements due for revision after January 1st of last year. So some of the action areas are also listed on the screen, but they include enhancing housing mobility strategies, encouraging development of new affordable housing in high resource areas, improving place-based strategies to encourage community conservation and revitalization, including preservation of existing affordable housing, and lastly, protecting existing residents from displacement, which we discussed throughout this symposium. The following components are required in the fair housing assessment required by HCD, and this study in particular, the mapping tool, can help cities pull data simultaneously for sections such as the disproportionate housing needs. Additionally, the map can also help cities analyze transportation opportunities by reviewing the high amenity transit layer, as well as access to a healthy environment by viewing the map with a Cal Enviro screen layer against the displacement layer, which you can kind of see on the screen grab. Lastly, the report and mapping tool can also assist cities with providing additional and relevant information, including local data and knowledge, as well as community input. Additionally, since HCD's ASFH guidelines note that housing elements must have actions to conserve and improve existing housing stock, policies identified in the toolkit could also be used as a baseline for cities when brainstorming which policies and goals to include in their updated housing element. And cities could essentially refer to the toolkit and use it as a guide to determine which policies they could strengthen or which they might actually like to explore. That concludes my presentation for today. I hope that you will all find the toolkit helpful in addressing ASFH and as a general resource to learn more about how other cities and counties have implemented policies to address displacement. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. My email is on the slide, and I can also drop it in the chat. Thomas, I will go ahead and pass it over to you to discuss RENA, and just let me know when to switch slides.
Thanks, Brenda. If you can bring up my first slide, that would be great. Good afternoon, everyone, or almost afternoon. I'm going to briefly walk through how SJCOG is addressing the mandated assessment of production and the advancement of objectives in the RENA methodology, which is in draft form right now from December 2021. And then we'll conclude with briefly looking at how we have been performing so far in the previous RENA cycle, and briefly look at some current and future challenges that we see in terms of the production of housing in San Joaquin County. And then I'll be handing it over to Christine Williams from Enterprise that will be talking about the REAP 2.0 tool to increase housing production. Next slide, please. So as you know, RENA is an assessment by HCD of the region's housing production and its future needs. This table is a reconfiguration of the final determination that HCD issued for San Joaquin County in December. And up at the top, you see where the component of existing population growth, which is the first line of the 28,664 housing units, forms 54% of this cycle's, future cycles, RENA determination. And there are several other adjustments made to account for the existing needs of the county, which in total compose another 46% of the adjustment. For context, in the previous cycle, which was running from 2014 to 2023, those adjustments actually composed a 5% reduction because of the high vacancy rate we had last time. And so in this cycle, our RENA numbers are up significantly. And when we annualize them, they're up over 50% from last time. And a huge part of that are these adjustments for existing needs, which include additional adjustments which weren't even in the last cycle, such as the cost burden adjustment, which is accounting for the 4,315 units you see here. What HCD does is it looks at that housing needs and looks at the composition of income across 4 categories: very low, low, moderate, and above moderate. Those categories are taken together in terms of the lower income groups, those with less than 80% of average median household income, being addressed for affordable housing. That is the lower income category. And the moderate and above moderate are allocated to single family units, and they're together looked at as the higher income units. And in the methodology, we look at those in aggregate because of that. And that gives us a housing unit need in terms of 21,637 multifamily units and 31,082 single family units during the next RENA cycle, which is running from 2023 to 2031. Next slide, please. So once that assessment of need is made, again, as I mentioned, there's a responsibility within the methodology to advance all 5 of these objectives. And I'm going to briefly discuss how that is done in this methodology. We have the actual report, which we'd be glad to send to anyone who would like it, as well as another PowerPoint presentation, which sort of walks through step-by-steps how it's made, which we can also provide links to. But today I'm just going to discuss not the numbers, but the process in terms of how these 5 objectives are met. The next slide, please. So the first 2 objectives of increasing housing supply, mix of housing types, tenure and affordability, promoting infill development, socioeconomic equity, protecting the environment, agricultural resources, and encouraging efficient development patterns is addressed through our incorporating the RTP and SCS forecast of growth. That's also a requirement in terms of aligning important planning policies, but because these are inherently part of what the RTP and SCS account for, we use this as the baseline to make sure that we're not only aligned, but in congruence in terms of the total number of units that each jurisdiction gets. In particular, at the what we do is we use the forecast of household growth by jurisdiction during 2023 to 2031 in the RTP SCS forecast, and that gives us the total allocation for each jurisdiction for this RHNA cycle. And then we use the county-wide share of lower and higher income to make an initial division between the affordable housing multifamily units and the single-family units, which is also, we'll come back to this in a moment, supporting the regional income parity, which is the 4th objective. But besides these 3, which gives us our baseline, there are the other additional objectives that we need to show meaningful contributions to. And if you'll change the next slide. We're using the 3 other factors besides the RTP and SCS to advance those. And on the next slide, we'll see that the first adjustment factor, sorry, the next slide.
Is it switching or no?
It's not on my screen.
Okay.
Great. The first of the 3 additional adjustment factors that we apply in the methodology is to advance this objective of promoting an improved interregional relationship between jobs and housing. And what we do is we take the jurisdictions with higher than average number of low-wage jobs to the number of affordable housing units in that jurisdiction, and we adjust their number of lower income affordable housing units upward. And we do the opposite for the those with a lower ratio. So what this is doing is it's more low-wage jobs per affordable housing units than the county average, means that we're going to increase the multifamily affordable units to address that gap. Next slide. Doing that, we're focusing on a different level than the jobs housing balance, because we're focusing on the need for equity and affordability of housing, particularly in the most vulnerable portions of the economy, and making sure that housing is available to lower paid employees, and make sure that the environmental costs and burdens aren't disproportionately put on lower paid workers compared to the county as a whole. And that obviously is important, but where it creates a particular challenge in San Joaquin County, as many of you know, is that with our growth in transportation and warehousing jobs in the south of the county in recent decades, that's an intersection where there are relatively low paid jobs in the same location as where wealthier growth in the county housing market has been occurring. which has made this a really challenging factor to accommodate in terms of the need to show an impact on change in terms of putting affordable housing in an area which has been appreciating in housing more than the rest of the county. Next slide, please. The next adjustment that we make is for the fourth RHNA objective, which is balancing disproportionate household income distributions. Again, we do this in part through what I described in that initial allocation process, but we also take it a step further by assessing the share of lower income households by jurisdictions. And then those jurisdictions with more with more high income households, we increase the multifamily affordable housing units, again, to try to promote an equity equal to that of the county. So trying to promote equality in the county across those housing units. Next slide. Again, the similar household incomes across the county is the best tool that we have at a county level to promote equality in terms of the structure of housing and the availability of housing. Next slide, please. And this factor is, as Brenda mentioned, is a new addition, which has come as a result of AB 686, and all RHNA methodologies and housing element plans after January 2021 had to address and incorporate this objective and show that it is encouraging development of new affordable housing in high resourced areas. And in this context, we're trying to advance more higher opportunity households in the county, leading to those places with higher opportunity shares of households having more multifamily affordable units. Again, adjusting those with higher resources in terms of opportunities, and decreasing those with lower opportunities in terms of putting affordable housing in there. Next slide. We use the HCD and California Tax Credit Allocation Committee's maps and their database to identify these high and highest resourced areas. We use those estimates for consistency within the RHNA process, looking at the number of housing units in each census tract that is identified as high and highest resource, and comparing that to the countywide average, which is how we make the adjustment. And again, this is adjusting for those disparities in opportunity to access, like employment, performance of schools, healthcare, and access to transportation. Next slide, please. So we apply all those three adjustment factors to the baseline adjustment, to the baseline allocation from the RTP and SCS. And this is where we land in terms of the draft methodology and the allocation across jurisdictions. The factor adjusted lower income, again, being the multifamily units, and the factor adjusted higher income being the single family housing units, and the column on the right being the total RHNA allocation per jurisdiction, and the bottom row being the HCD regional determination that we received. So this is the roadmap of where we're going in terms of addressing the identified future needs and existing needs in the county. In the next slide, we're looking at this slide in terms of how have we done so far? How has production been over the fifth cycle as we look now to the sixth cycle of the RHNA, looking out the future. What we did is we looked at the number of housing permits for multifamily units and the number of housing units for single family units. So in the first column of this table is the list by jurisdiction of the multifamily units using the Construction Industry Research Board data by jurisdiction during the period from 2014 to 2021. And then we prorated in terms of adjusting the fifth cycle RHNA, which runs from 2014 to 2023, 10-year period, to adjust it for an 8-year period. So we took 80% of that 10-year RHNA allocation and looked at what the targets were in the second column for multifamily houses. And that we show the percent difference in terms of the actual versus the expected RHNA allocations in the third column for the multifamily units. And we see every jurisdiction had challenges. Some had very significant challenges in meeting those multifamily units from the previous cycle. In the second three columns, we do the same for single family units, where we take the actual number of housing permits from the CIRB data for each jurisdiction in what's there, the fourth column, and we compare that to the prorated 8 out of 10-year allocation from the fifth cycle, and then we look at the percent difference. And in this, we see definite performance in certain jurisdictions, particularly Manteca, Lodi, and Tracy, meeting or exceeding their RHNA allocations. But in the 7th, 8th, and 9th columns, we see that when we look at it in total, everybody most everybody is struggling to meet their RHNA, and particularly when we account for those challenges in multifamily units, and acknowledge that overproduction in single family units is not in line with what we're trying to advance in terms of the mandates of the RHNA objectives. And my bottom of this table is cut off here. I'm sorry, at least on my screen it is, but what the bottom table is showing is that that CIRB data from 2014 to 2021 in terms of the number of permits issued for the county as a whole on an annual basis, comparing that to what the fifth cycle on an annual basis was allocating. And then in the last row, looking at the scale of difference that we have between what's been done, what we were under with the previous RHNA cycle, and what we're looking at in terms of this next RHNA cycle from the HCD determination, being an incredible step up, and again a huge challenge for our need to produce more housing, and in particular more affordable housing in San Joaquin County. And finally, on the last slide on the next page, we had been looking at some analyses that have come out recently by the National Association of Realtors. And so we pulled the data for San Joaquin County to look at the comparison. And what this graph shows is that, for instance, in the $50,000 to $100,000 household income bracket, which is on the blue dot at about 63% in 2016, that's showing that for those households making between $50,000 and $100,000 in 2016, that the number of houses that were listed that were affordable to people in those income groups was 63% of all listings. In the course of the 3-year period from 2016 to 2019, according to this data, that percentage of listings that were affordable to people in that income group bracket dropped to 44%. So an 18% decrease in affordability for that group. And you see particularly the groups up to 150,000, it's been a very troubling trend in this very short space of time in terms of the decline of affordability that we're seeing in the local housing market. And again, the challenge for affordable housing, not only multifamily affordable housing, but this, given that this is all listings, the cost of even single family houses are an increased challenge, given our historic income trends and situation. With that positive news, I am going to hand it over to Christine William, who is going to discuss REAP 2.0.
Thanks, Thomas. And thank you, everyone, I know these are kind of technical conversations we're having. If you do have any questions about either the toolkit or the RENA information that Thomas just presented, please feel free to drop those questions in the chat. After we kind of go through my next section, we will open up to have some more general conversation. So definitely happy to answer any questions if they've come up for you. Okay, so we're going to move along here, and I am going to be talking about a potential resource that COG will kind of oversee over the coming year here. And if you were here yesterday, we're going to open up a sort of interactive virtual whiteboard for you to drop your questions and comments in. And so that's what you're seeing on the slide here. And Brenda, if you could help me out by dropping the link to that website in the chat, as well as the code. You're going to go to that website, you will enter in the code, and then on the bottom left-hand screen, you will be able to toggle through some different slides. If you toggle over to day 2, there are a couple initial questions that are looking to capture some information around what policies and programs you are hoping to see in your community, as well as what challenges you might be facing that you are kind of looking for assistance on. And so again, you're going to toggle over to, it'll say day 2 Regional Housing Symposium, and there will be questions after that we're hoping to get feedback on, and we'll kind of review those collectively after this next section I go through. So go ahead, Brenda, we can skip to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to talk about an opportunity that's coming down from the state to make some headway on some of the policies that Brenda laid out in her toolkit, and that can hopefully also help implement policies to further public agencies meeting both their RENA and their housing elements requirements, as well as just support affordable housing development and prevent displacement more generally. And that opportunity is coming in the form of the REAP, sorry for all the acronyms, the REAP 2.0 program. If you are familiar with the REAP 1.0 program, you know that this is funding targeted towards our regional governing bodies, so metropolitan planning organizations like the San Joaquin Council of Governments, and has been really integral in getting these agencies more involved in intentional conversations around regional housing needs. Next slide, please. So last year in 2021, the state budget included a $600 million set aside. Oops, it looks like there's some folks having some difficulties in the Mentimeter app. So we'll work on that on the back end and hopefully get that adjusted. So $600 million was set aside last year for REAP 2.0. And these are funds that are intended to be used to help organizations like San Joaquin COG plan for and meet their goals under their respective sustainable community strategies. And I know a lot of you have participated kind of in the development of that particular plan. And they must also be used to support regional housing needs in a way that also reduces vehicle miles traveled, thereby reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So REAP can be used to help accelerate particularly infill housing development, so focusing on building denser housing near services and transportation options. And this can help shift residents' travel behavior, right? Get them out of their vehicles, increasing transit ridership, again, kind of having that climate greenhouse gas reducing nexus. These goals were all laid out in a framework paper the state released last year. In that paper, they solicited feedback to help inform some draft guidelines that we just heard will be released in April, so we'll be keeping our eyes out for that. There will be a period for public comment on those guidelines, and then we anticipate that a NOFA and the program application will be released in May of this year. Next slide, please. All right, so at Enterprise, we really think that REAP 2.0 offers a really critical opportunity to help advance affordable housing solutions while also helping move the needle toward achieving climate goals by funding projects that work to pair affordable housing with sustainable transportation alternatives. This type of investment is really critical because it promotes neighborhood stability, can help mitigate displacement risk, and it provides opportunities to lower income Californians, right? Vulnerable populations who are disproportionately represented by people of color, and again, reduces greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. Great, thank you. So we are waiting for, again, guidelines to sort of list like very tangible eligible project costs, but we do have these items that came out of the framework paper. And so, REAP 2.0 looks like it can fund some soft cost items like consultants, technical assistance, the planning work, again, to help accelerate that infill housing production, multimodal programs, plans, implementation funding to be able to implement those programs. Again, anything that moves the needle on helping shift travel behavior, so getting people out of those cars and offering them viable transportation options, increasing that type of ridership through funding, planning, and implementation projects. These were all laid out in the framework paper. And so, next slide, please. Enterprise has put together just a small sample of potential strategies that could be funded out of the REAP 2.0 program. All of these strategies help to advance affordable housing production and preservation, again, while also reducing vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions. And so the list I'm going to walk through with you is not exhaustive by any means, but we do hope it can jumpstart some ideas on your end of how your community might be able to utilize these funds and further your own housing goals. And so recall that we do anticipate kind of a more formal set of guidelines to come out in April. Next slide, please. So the first example we have here of how we might be able to utilize REAP 2.0 proceeds is to establish a type of regional transit-oriented development gap financing program. So if you're familiar with how affordable housing is financed, then you know that individual developments often have to cobble together just a multitude of funds from a variety of sources. And this can still often leave what we refer to as a gap in funding that prevents projects from being able to move forward and be completed. And if you've been listening to housing stakeholders here in San Joaquin County, then you also know that there really isn't much available in the way of local sources. So what cities and the county can put forth to help fill that gap. There's certainly not enough to support the number of developments coming forward to seek funding every year. And so what we call this local match, this local gap funding becomes really elusive. And so it's possible that REAP 2.0 could help fill that gap by creating a program that raises local match gap financing and is used in a way that focuses on affordable infill housing near high-frequency transit options and employment centers. In the full report that we'll be sharing with all of you, hopefully in the next couple of days here, we do highlight a couple of programs that exist elsewhere that mirror this type of investment strategy. So essentially, MPOs like San Joaquin COG would prioritize affordable development across the region that can show it has the greatest potential to reduce vehicle miles traveled. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so another example that REAP 2.0 has the potential to support could looking at a broader regional development strategy for publicly owned land. Specifically, any land that might be near planned transit stations. These sites typically are usually a little more difficult to develop, and so REAP 2.0 could be used to help fund important costs tied to pre-development, community engagement and planning, master planning, some of the engineering studies that would need to be done. Again, kind of aims to help accelerate infill development at those types of sites. And if you joined yesterday, you might recall that map I showed that shows where there is proposed transit station expansion within the county. It's possible that REAP 2.0 could support, again, sort of pre-development planning around those station areas to help proactively plan against displacement risk. Next slide, please. Okay, great. Another potential use we're kind of brainstorming around includes creating a financing tool that could help to acquire existing unsubsidized affordable housing. So this is often housing that is, quote unquote, affordable. Maybe it has habitability issues. Maybe there are other concerns around quality, but it is not restricted in the rents are not restricted in the same way we think of as when we think of affordable housing. These are often developments and units that have high risk for potential displacement, right? Because they're not protected in any way. And so a transit-oriented acquisition and preservation fund could help to acquire these units and make them permanently affordable, thereby mitigating displacement risk of existing residents, because typically that housing is brought under nonprofit, mission-oriented stewardship. This can help meet the sort of REAP greenhouse gas reduction requirement, one, by preventing displacement, right? So you're not having people moving further away from their services or their jobs, and thereby avoiding kind of those longer vehicle trips. Okay, next slide, please. This is the final example I'm just going to walk through today, and this type of program, so helping to fund needed infrastructure to support that infill housing development is also detailed in our report. We did a case study on San Joaquin COG's counterpart up in the Sacramento region, known as SACOG. They have a pilot program called Green Means Go, and essentially have designated specific corridors, neighborhoods, locations where they are hoping to kind of, again, accelerate and facilitate infill housing development. And so frequently, again, if you've talked to kind of developers in the community, one big hurdle can be the cost of infrastructure. So maybe you want to, redevelop a site, but you have a sewer line running, in the street that isn't going to be able to kind of handle the increased demand that's going to come from that development. These can be very costly upgrades that can keep sites from moving forward. So it's possible that REAP 2.0 could be used to fund infrastructure upgrades to, again, help kind of ease the burden of improving affordable housing infill development feasibility. And so these concerns around infrastructure upgrades were something we heard from almost all of the public agencies we interviewed as part of the study. So thought this might be of particular interest to those folks tuning in. And I'm going to pause. I saw there was a lot of chat activity. So Brenda, does it look like the Mentimeter woes have been kind of addressed? Yes, for the most part. So if you did not see the comment in the chat, if you aren't able to get past day one's first question for some reason, you can go ahead and submit a test answer and it should let you just skip through all of day one's questions. But also feel free to submit additional answers for day one. Once you get to day two questions, you will have to submit an answer for the first one, I believe, to continue on. And there's about 4 or 5 questions after that. So I think we can go ahead and give folks a few more minutes because I think there was some trouble getting past the first day. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and you can also drop your answers in the chat. So while also sorry if you can hear my very angry 18-month-old in the background, who is really fighting a nap. Okay, so Brenda, if you can go ahead and drop the screen share. Thank you. The first question we had has to do with what you're seeking to do in your community, right? And this can be as broad as you want, right? So I see someone dropped in, produce more multifamily units. Looks like we have a test answer hanging out. But also, please feel free to drop that in the chat if that's easier. So looking just for comments there on what you're looking to put forward, as well as what are current barriers that your community is facing? Do you need funding? Do you have site constrictions? And while folks are including or dropping that information in, I kind of want to invite San Joaquin COG, I think maybe Kim or Christine, if there's anything else you want to add about REAP so far, where you're at in the process, or if any of kind of the items we went over stand out to you, happy to kind of open up a discussion there.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. Hi, everyone. Christine Corrales with SJCOG. I thought I would just chime in on at least what we're currently working on with our REAP $1, just to provide folks on the line a little bit of a peek into what we're currently funding with the dollars that we have available for the region. And so with our REAP 1 funds, we've been working at the regional scale as well as the local scale to support housing planning activities. At the regional scale, you did see Dr. Pogue's presentation just previously to Christine Williams' presentation here on the regional housing needs allocation process. So part of our REAP funds are helping to improve the methodology for our 2022 RENA plan. In addition to that, we're also currently working on a regional housing trust fund feasibility study. What we heard from our board as well as stakeholders in the last couple of years is a strong interest to understand what could we potentially raise in terms of dedicated funding for our localities to build projects and support other housing programs. And so we currently are in the process, SJCOG, seeking for proposals to conduct that feasibility study for our region. We think that's going to be a big project for and planning activity for SJCOG and its key stakeholders in the next coming years. And then in addition to that, at the regional scale, SJCOG has been just focusing a little bit more time, staff time on housing planning, coordination, and technical assistance with our local agencies. But on the local scale, we've also been sub-allocating some of those REAP funds, a majority of those REAP funds to cities and the county. And our jurisdictions here are really focused on improving their processes for getting housing built. They're looking at targeted site pro formas, pre-approved plans, and neighborhood plans, as well as infrastructure plans. So Christine Williams did mention water and sewer infrastructure being a potential barrier. And so some of our cities are being proactive with that planning money to understand what are some of those infrastructure challenges. So I'll pause there and see if we have any, if we want to look at these responses here.
Yeah, we've got some answers coming in. So sorry if you see me refreshing, just makes it a little easier to get those populated. So some interest in producing more multifamily units, also a couple comments about ensuring that we're including community in the process as we work to maybe enact some policies that have been talked about today, ensuring that units that are built are affordable to local income. Sorry, can you folks hear me okay? Is it getting choppy?
It's a little choppy.
Okay, I will switch very quickly to computer audio. One moment here. The joys of virtual gatherings. Second.
Okay, is that any better?
Yeah.
Thank you for bearing with me. Okay, so comments here around, yes, infrastructure and infill areas. I think making sure that development, we're looking at local developers and investors first. So I think that all kind of aligns, particularly with some takeaways from yesterday. I also saw we've got some challenges listed, so maybe not as much community support for multifamily housing in specific locations, trying to navigate bureaucracy, right, and getting things advanced in a timely manner. Again, kind of fighting these outside forces that might have market implications, income challenges, funding. I can appreciate that. So feel free to keep adding these in. If you continue on with the slides, great. Curious if folks can start populating some responses on how you think REAP might benefit the region as a whole, right? So sounds like folks are in favor, obviously, of that infill, addressing the infill challenges. Let's see if any more have come in.
I think what's interesting for SJCOG, kind of looking at what Enterprise has highlighted as examples of other programs. And I think that the TOD piece is something for SJCOG to consider, given that our 2022 regional transportation plan actually includes a pretty significant chunk of funding going towards building out our regional rail system. This investment will improve some of our transit connections by rail to the Bay Area, to Sacramento, as well as the rest of the San Joaquin Valley. And from our conversation yesterday, there are some, studies that have found that rail investment could potentially contribute to neighborhood instability. And so those are some potential opportunities to think about transit-oriented development in the context of what our regional transportation plan has in store for the future.
Okay, sorry, I've got my daughter crying again. Yes, so I think, again, like kind of aligning, right, making these funds work in a regional way that can maybe create that sort of advanced planning to make it easy for those station areas to kind of facilitate housing and get people to utilize the transportation options. Sounds like it aligns great. We also have some more comments coming in. Looks like folks were in favor of looking for a pre-development source of funds. creating more sort of public land that can be utilized for housing development. Looks like TOD is supported over here. Let's refresh, see if anything new. Yep, some of the benefits of developing housing proximate to jobs and transportation options. Let's see. We also have this last little slide has a poll here where you can kind of indicate if any of those options were of interest to you. So see folks weighing in there. Great. Any items on here, Christine, specifically that stand out or you want to dig into a little bit more?
No, I think a lot of these align with what we've presented already this morning, but I think what I wanted to kind of stress to the group today is that because we don't have like the guidelines yet for the REAP 2 program, this is still a really early conversation for us to be having, but it helps to kind of start generating some of these ideas in anticipation of the state giving us a little bit more guidance on how we could use our REAP 2 dollars. And based on, you know, what we've heard from Christine's presentation earlier, there's a lot of opportunity to be thinking about ways to link other goals with housing goals, like greenhouse gas reduction, vehicle miles traveled, and promoting mode shift. So in addition to some of these ideas that you all are generating here, something I also wanted to kind of raise up is that SJCOG is also piloting some new mobility equity projects here in the region. And so kind of thinking about some of the investments that we're making to address and close mobility gaps for our disadvantaged communities at affordable housing sites, through providing affordable car share and affordable bike share services. We're also looking at piloting incentives programs to help kind of move the needle towards this concept of universal basic mobility. So for folks who may be extremely cost burdened on the housing side, are there things that we could be doing as a transportation agency to reduce the burden of costs associated with transportation? So these are some other ideas on the transportation side of things to also be thinking about, because from the way that I'm reading REAP 2, it's pretty flexible. And we are piloting a lot of new types of services at SJCOG to close the gap and to coordinate and meet housing and transportation goals at the same time.
Great. Yes, so as Christine mentioned, we're kind of waiting for guidelines to come out in April. Happy to share those with folks if you're curious. Again, they'll be soliciting feedback. So if you think there's something missing or have concerns or want to put something specific forward, that will be the time to do so. Christine, unless you want to expand upon on REAP, I can kind of bring us back full picture and talk a little bit about what folks can expect in regards to the release of this study we've been collaborating on.
Yeah, maybe just to give you all a preview of what's to come. We know that the guidelines are coming out later this spring, and we're expecting that the REAP 2.0 application will be due at the end of the calendar year. And so, as I mentioned, this is a preliminary conversation with a lot of our stakeholders on the housing side of the house, housing side of SJCOG's work. And so we're looking to kind of reconvene a number of times throughout the calendar year to kind of flesh out some of these ideas. And so don't fret, this isn't the only opportunity to provide your feedback, but especially if you aren't already on an email list, we'll definitely keep the one here from the event to keep you all posted on opportunities to continue giving input to our team. And so just wanted to give you all a high level expectation. We don't have a full schedule yet, but we're kind of working towards this end goal of fleshing out a REAP 2.0 program by the end of the calendar year. So stay tuned from us at SJCOG.
Christine, could you also note for folks, I know Tom did his presentation earlier on the regional housing needs allocation process, just note the public hearing and the due date for comments and maybe next steps on that process in case folks have interest.
Sure thing. So we have a public hearing scheduled for tomorrow's board meeting at SJCOG. Actually, it's virtual, so you all are able to tune in to the board meeting via Zoom tomorrow afternoon, starting at 4 p.m. We'll be holding a public hearing for the RENA methodology that Thomas just presented earlier this afternoon. And so you all are welcome to listen in and provide comment on the methodology itself verbally. If not, you can also submit written comment. The deadline for that will be March 4th, so next Friday by 4 p.m. And you can send that directly to, we can provide the email address for providing comment in the chat box. But so if verbal is not your thing, there's also another method through email or mail, but email might be the best, most expedient way to submit your comments.
I did actually just have somebody chat me a comment for Thomas, if that makes sense to ask that really quick. So Thomas, the question is, can you share more about why the RENA methodology is proposing to assume that all new production of low income units will be multifamily and all new production of markets above market rate will be single family?
Yeah, that's a product of HCD. That's the way that we're required to treat them. It's challenging because particularly in some areas you can find affordable single family houses, but that's the way we're required within the RENA rules to allocate things. So affordable is allocated to multifamily, and less affordable is allocated to single family.
Maybe just to follow on that, Tom, it ties back to the housing element. So when the jurisdictions accommodate the housing need in their housing element, the way they do that is to zone appropriate land, and the way that's done technically is it's higher density land. And I believe, Tom, I sometimes get this wrong, 20 units to the acre is the threshold. Depends on the size of the jurisdiction, whether it's 20
Right.
or 30 units to the acre. But yeah, so that's why we talk about it in terms of multifamily and single family housing. And that's not to say all multifamily is affordable, and it's not to say all single family is moderate or above. It's just a technical requirement of how the housing elements are developed.
Great, thanks. And I saw Christine also dropped the email in if you do want to submit written comments on the RENA methodology, the draft report. So, okay, any other general comments if you'd like to drop them in the chat? Otherwise, I can talk a little bit about what everyone can expect as we get ready to put out the final report. So as Brenda mentioned, there is a webpage on San Joaquin COG's website where all of this information will live. It will have the full report. It will have the policy toolkit that Brenda walked through. It will have a link to the mapping tool. So all of those resources are publicly available and at your disposal to use. If you have specific questions, we'll also be sending all of this information out in a follow-up email after the conclusion of the symposium. If you have any questions, please feel free to respond to that email, and we will, work with you to address any questions or to talk with you more about the resources that have been produced as part of this study. Again, I see Brenda's dropping a lot of good information in the chat for you to take back with you. We are honored that we got to spend these 2 days with all of you. Appreciate the great feedback you've provided on Mentimeter. I think we've got some good kind of ideas for COG to work with as they look to move this work forward. But appreciate all of the time here today, and turn it back over to COG for any closing remarks. But thank you all again.
I was going to say, were you kicking that back to me right now?
Yeah, yes, yeah.
I usually start by saying I've talked quite enough, but yeah, I did want to say, special thanks to the consultant team. We appreciate all the information, and to the team here at SJCOG, led by Christine Corrales, but Angela Kranza and Christine Tran have always been working very hard on this, and particularly Angela is one of our Civic Spark fellows this time, and we've really appreciated her work here. And also to Tom Pogue, who's been assisting SJCOG in all the technical aspects of the methodology. So yeah, shout out to the team, and we're looking forward to hearing more comments from you folks that have attended this. We've had good participation, and you really are appreciated.
Great. Thanks, everyone. With that, 9 minutes back in your day. Thank you again for sitting with us, and we hope you had some good takeaways, learned a lot. We certainly did from you. So thank you.